The European Poker Tour is back in Barcelona for the first super high roller of the season.
When you're winning, other players tend to be a little bit afraid of you and you can run them over.
Actions on Steven Silverman. Queens under the gun.
Silverman was on the American Poker reality show 2 months, 2 million. It was the highest rated poker reality show in its time slot starring Steve Silverman.
He's raised to 15,000. Dan Smith has Queen Jack suited.
Dan's in rough shape, but he's got the exact kind of hand you can sometimes crack bigger hands with.
He calls. Negreanu's out. As are Bakar and Siva. Ravensbeck will fold the big blind, so we're heads up to the flop. And that flop is Jack, Jack 5, trips for Smith.
Hi-ya! Steve's almost always going to bet this because he's almost always going to have the best hand.
He does continue for 27,000.
I don't think he's folding.
Nope. He calls.
Dan opts to just calls. There are plenty of hands he could peel a turn with that aren't nearly as strong.
6 of spades on the turn. Smith with a virtual lock on the hand, 98% equity.
None of these cards are really saving Silverman.
Bets again, 65,000.
Now, does Dan raise or just call and go for all his value on the river?
He calls.
River it is.
230,000 in the middle, Silverman with not much more than that behind. The case jack on the river, quads for Dan Smith.
This is just a horrific card for Silverman. He's now got a full house, and in his mind, he's only losing the aces or kings, which probably would have gotten him 3-bet pre-flop.
Mullen.
Silverman shoves.
Oy.
Call.
Dan Smith calls.
Quick check of the quads.
Put in.
No kidding.
That is just brutal.
Steven Silverman eliminated.
Good luck, guys. Appreciate that.
He folds. Eric Seidel opens from under the gun +1 with ace-queen to 16,000. Dan Smith has kings.
Almost always going to see a 3-bet with kings.
Not this time, he just calls.
Interesting. Dan's not wanting to look too strong, so he just calls. Calling reps a much wider range, and there's always a chance someone gets cute behind you.
Heads up to the flop. Quack, quack, quack.
Eric will probably continue with what he presumes will be the best hand a big percentage of the time. Dan, of course, flops a full house.
Seidel does continue for 18,000.
Let's see if Dan continues to play this deceptively by just calling. I think raising here would be a real mistake.
He does call.
Don't want to chase away that action.
The turn is a queen. Seidel now has a full house.
Really terrible card for Eric. He's now going to have the best hand almost all of the time.
Fires again, 25,000.
We know Eric is more likely to call raise here than I am to call an ex-girlfriend after 2 a.m., but does Dan know that?
Dan does raise, makes it 75,000 total.
Dan claims to keep his cool in these spots. What do you people think? Is he giving anything away? Let us know on Twitter, #@EBTBarcelona. Now, don't get me wrong, this raise looks extremely strong, but A, Dan's had quads once already. What are the odds? Am I right, people? B, B, and C closing. Always be closing.
Eh?
I remember now. Even though that raise looks super strong, there are, in Eric's mind, only 2 hands that are beating him, kings and aces. And what are the odds Dan flatted with those pre-flop?
On this occasion, he did. Seidel now checks the river, having called Smith's raise on the turn.
Would have been really sick if a deuce had hit. Dan obviously has to bet again, but he can't be like me when a girl lets me buy her a drink in a bar, all eager. That's how you scare him off.
234,000 in the pot. He bets 200,000.
This is just a gross spot for Eric, you can tell, because all the liquid just drained from his body. You can't fault him for thinking about this, and you can't fault him if he eventually calls either. You can, however, throw him a parade if he somehow manages to lay this down. This is your run-of-the-mill / incredibly rare cooler crying call.
He can't get away from it, he calls. And Smith gets maximum value.
Eric Seidel's been getting brutalized by Dan Smith today.
Seidel loses 310,000 there.
Dan, don't say anything. Don't look at him. He is a legend.
I like the way he played that. In all things considered, I think it was really, really good way to play it.
Quiet, Daniel. He's right there.
So Dan Smith extends his chip lead. He's now playing. He's in the cutoff. And he has pocket aces.
Well, if you're looking to be the chip leader, I always recommend picking up aces. I don't know why more players don't do it. It's a no-brainer.
He raises to 14,000. Negreanu has jacks.
Daniel's been pretty miserable so far today, and it looks like he might get his wish for it all to be coming to an end.
I'm gonna make it 38,000. And when I screw it up, it end up
That'll be a 3-bet.
in potpourri of the mess.
Math is hard. Dr. Scalp is out of there.
Back on Smith.
I'm thinking re-raise.
Which will probably induce a shove, which will be called.
Okay, good luck. I call.
Sure enough.
That's good. I was like, whatever, let's just do it. I told you no thinking today, no matter what, I promised.
Story checks out.
I was happy he raised me. I really was. I wanted to get it in, but not against that. To prepay.
I don't think you're allowed to get cute when you have aces. None of that.
No jack.
Not even close.
Negreanu is going to need to see a jack on the turn or river to survive.
Aces, huh?
Yep.
Just the river to come. 2 outs for Daniel Negreanu.
Good luck, man. I don't think it's coming anymore. I changed my mind.
Insurance?
He's in this tournament for 100,000. He's got an amazing record in the Super High Roller format. He's 3 for 3 so far.
Dan Smith. He can do it.
Make that 3 for 4.
Good luck, man. All right, bud. Good luck, y'all.
Folds. Michael Watson, 6-5 suited. Raises, makes it 22K. Eric Seidel has pocket sixes.
Likely to see a call.
Sure enough, Eric does call. Dan Smith on the button has ace-king.
Dan's almost certainly going to 3-bet here, in position with all that action behind him. And don't forget those massive chips.
He re-raises to 63,000. Sam Chartier's just joined the feature table. He folds. Simon Ravensbeck also has ace-king.
Another ace-king out there. This is going to make things pretty crazy.
Ravensbeck 4-bets to 134,000. Watson and Seidel both fold.
Now this is a little less exciting now since these two are destined to chop.
Smith 5-bets.
I'm all in.
Ravensbeck moves all in, and Smith calls.
This guy Ravensbeck must have some rep considering none of these guys ever appear to be afraid to get it in with him. 96% chance of a chop. No reason to hide that gorge face now.
The flop has 2 spades on it, and Smith holds the ace of spades.
Backdoor sweat.
And there's a spade on the turn. Oh, come on. That would be too gross, right?
To anyone else holding spades, I don't want to know.
Trust me, neither does Ravensbeck.
And the river brings another spade.
Oof. That was less cool than talking about a guy's bachelor party in front of his wife.
That was grotesque.
Dan, it's okay if you want to laugh.
Ravensbeck gets 4 flush, and a big stack is taken out by the chip leader, who now has close to 2.8 million, a phenomenal number of chips.
Can we please lose another player soon? That average makes me uncomfortable.
Dan Smith, Jack 9 offsuit. Smith, the overwhelming tournament chip leader.
Been folded to him. He's in relatively late position.
Yeah, he's in the cutoff. He raises to 36,000. Gets rid of Kurzovic on the button.
Kurzovic folds a dominating hand.
JC Alvarado folds the small blind. Mike McDonald has Jack 10 in the big blind.
Also has Smith dominated, but he is out of position.
Looks like Mike will defend, and we will see a flop. That flop 7, Jack 9, 2 pair for Smith, the straight draw and top pair for McDonald.
This flop is the worst thing that happened to a McDonald since trans fats got banned.
McDonald checks to the razor. Smith continues for 52,000.
Even though Mike's way behind, top pair and a good gut shot is almost just as good. Just not quite.
McDonald calls.
Looks like he might even think his hand is too strong to raise there.
The turn is another jack, another full house for Dan Smith. McDonald improves to trips.
This is just getting insanely bad. This is the worst thing to happen to a McDonald's since New York City banned large sodas.
McDonald checks a second time. Smith, will bet a second time by the looks of things. Sure enough, 133,000.
There's a good shot. Mike just calls again, wanting Dan to keep repping that jack, which he is doing because he has it.
How much is Mike McDonald going to lose in this hand?
At least another 133,000.
Yeah, he calls, taking us to the river. 462,000 in the pot. No 10 on the river. Smith still good.
Let's see how Mike plays this. Does he lead the river and hope for a call? No, he checks the river and hopes for a bet.
He's going to get it.
He is gonna get it.
371,000.
That is a huge bet. Now Mike might be worried Dan's actually got a better jack. This is one of those polarizing bet sizes. Dan's not doing this with most of his non-nut value hands.
Mike calls.
Whoops.
1.2 million chip pot will slide across to Dan Smith.
There's really not much you can do there. You gonna fold 3 jacks? No. Hand was just a cold deck. The worst thing to happen to a McDonald's since heart disease.
Dan Smith is now playing nearly 3.5 million. He has more than 3 times the tournament average.
He's riding the chip train up Cha-Ching Mountain. Programming on the Discovery Channel.
Blinds at 8,000, 16,000 with a 2,000 ante. Action has been folded around to Iñat Liviu. The Romanian pro has pocket 10s. And he is raising, makes it 32,000. Ryan Kamaya folds. Steve O'Dwyer will pass the jack 8.
Woof.
8-7 suited for JC Alvarado.
On the button, yum, yum. If this hand looks delicious, then being in position is like looking at its picture on the menu.
Alvarado will call. Litvinov gives up the small blind. Dan Smith in the big blind as Queen 6 suited.
Dan's getting good pot odds. A call here would be borderline if he didn't have all the chips in the universe, but he does, so it's totes fine.
So Smith calls as well. We are going 3-way to the flop. That flop, 6-9 deuce. Second pair for Smith, an up and down draw for Alvarado. Liviu still leads with 10s.
Liviu was the original raiser.
55.
And he's got the most to protect against.
Dan Smith checks to him. Liviu bets 55,000.
I don't know that this bet will get either of these players to fold, however.
Alvarado calls.
Liviu's actually got 2 blockers to his hand.
Smith calls as well. It's a 3-way to the turn.
Calls a little questionable, but Dan's getting stupid pot odds again.
And he hits another 6 on the turn. Trips for the chip leader.
This is a grosser turn than the twist in the crying game. JC is now dead to 4 outs. Dan all but locks his hand up, and no one's really likely to think this card changed anything.
Dan checks a second time. Liviu bets a second time, 125,000. Action on Alvarado.
He's getting a decent price to chase his straight. Meanwhile, Dan's got a super disguised monster.
Alvarado calls.
JC was getting an even better price, assuming Dan comes along for the ride. And spoiler alert, he's not folding.
But is he raising? No, he's calling.
Dan overcalls on 3 streets. Gotta wonder if anyone's spidey sense is tingling yet.
3-way to the river, which is another 6. This is the second time in the tournament that Dan Smith has had quads.
The second time today. All pairs now have full houses, just like Liviu over there has got.
Smith checks a third time. Liviu now checks as well.
Wow, either a very astute player or a guy who's going to lose value a lot of the time. I'm willing to chalk it up to some kind of insane physical read.
Alvarado with the